The morning started like any other on humanity's last hope station. Admiral William Carter sat in his office, drinking his third cup of coffee and reading through the usual reports from human colonies scattered across the galaxy. Mining quotas from New Cornwall, crop yields from Haven's Rest, trade disputes from Fort Independence. All the mundane business of a species that had learned to keep its head down and follow orders. Then the priority message arrived. Carter's aide, Lieutenant Rebecca Stone, brought it in personally rather than sending it through the usual channels. Her face was pale, and her hands shook slightly as she handed him the datapad. "Sir, this just came through Imperial Command. Priority Alpha." Carter took the device and began reading. With each line, his expression grew darker. The coffee in his cup grew cold as he read the message twice, then a third time, hoping he had misunderstood something. He had not. Complete planetary surrender within 30 standard days, the message read in the Empire's formal, emotionless style. All human military assets to be transferred to Imperial control immediately. All human children between the ages of 12 and 18 are to report to designated processing centers for genetic assessment and potential selection for Imperial breeding programs. The datapad cracked in Carter's grip. 300 years. 300 years since the Zephyrian Empire had conquered humanity's scattered worlds and turned them into nothing more than resource extraction sites and labor camps. 300 years of keeping their heads down, paying their taxes, sending their quotas of food and minerals to feed the Empire's endless appetite. 300 years of being treated like useful animals rather than intelligent beings. But this was different. This crossed a line that Carter had not even known existed. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "call an emergency meeting. All department heads, all colony representatives who can make it here within 6 hours. And send a coded message to Captain Parker on the Outer Rim. Tell him it's time to come home." Stone nodded and hurried out. Carter stood and walked to his office window, staring out at the stars that had once belonged to humanity. Earth was visible as a tiny blue dot in the distance, still beautiful despite the orbital mining platforms that now surrounded it like metal parasites. The meeting room filled quickly. General David Thompson arrived first, still wearing his maintenance overalls to keep up the pretense that he was just a station engineer. Colonel Emma Hayes came next, followed by Dr. Helen Brooks from the medical bay, Captain James Foster from what the Empire thought was a civilian cargo operation, and a dozen others. Each of them had spent decades pretending to be something they were not. Engineers who were actually military strategists. Doctors who were weapons specialists. Cargo captains who commanded hidden warships. All of them playing their parts in humanity's longest con game. Carter placed the datapad in the center of the table and stepped back. "Read it," he said simply. The silence that followed was the kind that comes before storms. Thompson was the first to speak, his voice barely controlled. "They want our children." "Not just want," Hayes corrected grimly. "They're taking them. 4 breeding programs." Dr. Brooks looked up from the message, her face white with rage. "I've seen the Imperial genetic research. I know what they do to the subjects. They don't create soldiers. They create slaves. Slaves who are bred to be loyal to the Empire from birth." Foster slammed his fist on the table. 3 centuries we've played along with their game. We've pretended to be weak, pretended to be broken, all so they would leave us alone enough to survive. But this is genocide, Carter finished. Not the quick kind with weapons and explosions. The slow kind where they take everything that makes us human and turn it into something else. Around the table, faces that had learned to hide their true feelings for decades finally showed their anger. These were not the defeated remnants of a conquered species. These were survivors who had been waiting for the right moment to stop surviving and start fighting back. Thompson leaned forward. "Admiral, if we do this, if we finally drop the mask, there's no going back. The Empire will throw everything they have at us." Carter nodded. "I know. They'll call it rebellion. They'll say we're terrorists and criminals. They'll try to wipe us out completely." "Can we win?" asked Hayes. The question hung in the air for a long moment. Carter thought about the hidden shipyards in the asteroid belts. The weapon caches buried on supposedly peaceful farming worlds. The defense platforms disguised as communication arrays. The warships hiding behind cargo hauler registration numbers. 3 centuries of careful preparation, of playing the long game while the Empire grew complacent. "Maybe," he said finally. "Maybe not. But I'd rather die fighting as a human being than live as the Empire's livestock." He activated the room's communication system and entered a code that had not been used in over 200 years. Across the galaxy, similar codes began activating on human worlds, in hidden bases, aboard disguised ships. The signal humanity had hoped they would never need to send. This is Admiral Carter to all human forces, all colonies, all free citizens of humanity. The mask comes off today. I repeat, the mask comes off today. Operation Awakening is now active. The responses began coming in immediately. New Cornwall acknowledged. Haven's Rest acknowledged. Fort Independence acknowledged. One by one, human worlds that had pretended to be helpless farming colonies and mining outposts confirmed they were ready to reveal their true nature. Carter looked around the room at his officers, these brave men and women who had spent their entire lives preparing for a day they hoped would never come. Send one more message, he told Stone. Open channel to Imperial Command. The room fell silent as Carter composed humanity's reply to the Empire's ultimatum. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of suppressed anger and the iron determination of a species that had finally decided it would rather die free than live in chains. To the Zephyrian Empire. Message received and acknowledged. Our response is simple. Come and take them. The transformation began 12 hours after Admiral Carter's message went out across the galaxy. On human worlds that the Empire had catalogued as harmless farming colonies and mining outposts, the pretense of 3 centuries finally ended. Captain Michael Brooks stood in what Imperial records listed as a grain storage facility on New Cornwall. Around him, his team worked with quiet efficiency as massive hydraulic systems rumbled to life deep beneath the wheat fields. The grain silos that had fed the Empire for decades began to split open like mechanical flowers, revealing something the Zephyrians had never suspected. Particle beam array online, reported Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from her control station. Power core at 90% and climbing. Brooks watched through the facility's periscope as more defensive positions revealed themselves across the planet's surface. Communications towers that had seemed innocent for generations extended additional arrays bristling with weapons. Farmhouses split apart to expose missile batteries. Even the peaceful irrigation systems began reconfiguring themselves into targeting networks. The Empire catalogued us as a Class 7 agricultural world, Brooks said to his second-in-command, Major Robert Clark. Population mostly farmers and simple laborers. No military value beyond food production. Clark smiled grimly as he watched the transformation through his own viewer. Think they'll want to update our classification? 3 star systems away, Colonel David Thompson stood on the bridge of what every Imperial patrol had logged as the cargo hauler Peaceful Harvest. The name was painted in friendly blue letters along the ship's hull, right next to images of smiling farmers and cartoon vegetables. Imperial customs officers had inspected the ship dozens of times over the years, always finding exactly what the manifest claimed: grain, vegetables, and mining equipment. They had never thought to look closer at the mining equipment. Hull plating retraction complete, announced his weapons officer, Lieutenant Maria Foster. Around them, the bridge transformed as fake wall panels slid away to reveal military-grade sensor arrays and command interfaces. All weapon systems coming online. Through the viewscreen, Thompson watched as similar transformations occurred throughout the human merchant fleet. Cargo haulers became heavy cruisers. Transport ships revealed themselves as troop carriers. Even the small personal shuttles that carried messages between colonies suddenly sprouted weapon pods and advanced engine systems. The Empire had always wondered how humanity managed to maintain such efficient communication and supply networks across so many scattered worlds. Now they were about to discover that the civilian ships they had ignored for centuries were actually one of the largest military fleets in the galaxy. But the most important transformation was happening in the radioactive ruins of old Earth's Australian continent. Captain James Parker led a team that Imperial permits identified as archaeological researchers studying pre-conquest human civilization. Their work sites were scattered across the dead cities, carefully catalogued as historical preservation projects. The Empire liked the idea of humans studying their own defeat. It seemed appropriately humble. Dr. Helen Carter worked her scanner over what looked like collapsed building foundations, searching for the signal that had been broadcast from her father's station. Around her, other archaeologists did the same across dozens of dig sites. Got something, she called out as her scanner detected metal far below the rubble. Sealed vault, exactly where the archive said it would be. Parker hurried over as the excavation team began clearing debris. They worked quickly but carefully, knowing that Imperial satellites were always watching. To any observer, they appeared to be simply uncovering another piece of human history. But what they found beneath 3 centuries of carefully maintained ruins was something far more dangerous than old pottery or documents. The vault contained complete technical specifications for every warship, weapon system, and defense platform that humanity had built before the conquest. The Empire had thought they had destroyed all trace of human military technology. They had been wrong. "Everything's here," whispered Dr. Carter as she scrolled through the data files. "Ship designs, weapon blueprints, manufacturing protocols, tactical manuals. It's all preserved." Parker felt a chill as he realized what this meant. The Empire had always assumed that modern humans were soft and weak because they had never known war. But their ancestors had fought each other for thousands of years before the conquest. They had developed weapons and strategies that made even the Empire's generals nervous. Now those weapons were about to return to the galaxy. As the transformation continued across human space, other species began to take notice. On the crystal world of Vector, mining slaves looked up from their work as human cargo ships suddenly began moving in coordinated formations rather than random trade patterns. On the ocean world of Aquatica, the dolphin-like natives watched through their underwater cities as human research vessels revealed hidden weapon arrays. Most importantly, in the slave markets of the Empire's inner worlds, other conquered species began to whisper among themselves. If the humans were finally fighting back after 3 centuries of submission, what did that mean for everyone else? The Empire's first response was predictable. Fleet Admiral Corvex dispatched patrol squadrons to investigate the unusual activity on human worlds. His reports to Emperor Valdris IX were confident and dismissive. "Minor civil unrest, Your Majesty. Some kind of religious movement, perhaps, or political demonstration. Nothing our local garrisons can't handle." But when the first Imperial patrol ship approached New Cornwall and demanded that the humans explain their defensive preparations, Captain Brooks gave them an answer that would echo across the galaxy. "We're done explaining ourselves to you," he said simply. "If you want to know what we're doing, you'll have to come and find out." The patrol ship's commander, certain he was dealing with confused farmers, ordered his vessel into orbit for a closer look. Brooks waited until the Imperial ship was in perfect position, then gave the order that announced humanity's return to war. "All batteries, open fire." The first Imperial ship to die in humanity's rebellion lasted exactly 37 seconds. Admiral Carter stood alone in his communications chamber, looking at the recording device that would carry humanity's voice to every corner of the galaxy. He had spent 3 days writing the message, choosing each word carefully. This would not be a plea or a negotiation. This would be a declaration. He pressed the activation button. "To Emperor Valdris IX and the Zephyrian Empire. To all species who serve under Imperial rule. To all free beings throughout the galaxy." Carter's voice was calm and steady, carrying the weight of 3 centuries of suppressed anger. "I am Admiral William Carter, speaking for all of humanity. We have endured your rule for 300 years. We have paid your taxes, filled your quotas, and bent our necks to your boot. No more." The message broadcast on frequencies the Empire did not know humans could access, reaching every world simultaneously. In slave quarters and mining camps, in the towers of Imperial governors and the bridges of warships, everyone stopped to listen. "You have demanded our children for your breeding programs. You have asked us to surrender the last thing that makes us human. Our answer is simple: come and take them. You have 72 hours to withdraw from all human worlds and cease hostile actions against our colonies. Refuse, and learn why your ancestors chose to cage us rather than fight us." On Zephyr Prime, Emperor Valdris IX received the message in his throne room, surrounded by his military advisors. The vast chamber fell silent as Carter's words echoed off the marble walls. Then Fleet Admiral Corvex began to laugh. "Your Majesty, surely this is some kind of joke. 300 years of submission, and now they think they can threaten us." The Emperor's yellow eyes gleamed with amusement. "Indeed. Send a response, Admiral. Destroy 3 of their worlds. Let them understand the price of defiance." Within hours, 3 massive Imperial fleets departed for the human colonies of New Sydney, Fort Independence, and Haven's Rest. Each fleet contained enough firepower to level a planet. The Empire expected quick, decisive victories that would bring the humans back into line. Captain Thomas Reed commanded the defense of New Sydney from his converted mining ship, the Iron Will. Around him, his crew of former miners and farmers worked at stations they had trained on in secret for decades. Through the viewscreen, he watched the Imperial dreadnoughts drop out of hyperspace like dark metal monsters. "Incoming transmission from the Imperial flagship," announced his communications officer, Lieutenant Kate Phillips. The image of Imperial Admiral Vorthak appeared on screen, his reptilian features twisted in contempt. "Human vessel, you will surrender immediately. Your pathetic defenses cannot stand against the might of the Empire. Submit now, and we may spare your civilian population. Reed looked around his bridge at faces he had known since childhood. These were people who had spent their entire lives pretending to be harmless. Miners who were actually military engineers. Farmers who were tactical specialists. Shopkeepers who commanded hidden weapon systems. Tell the Admiral, Reed said quietly, that he has confused us with someone who gives a damn about his mercy. All batteries, prepare to engage. The battle that followed was unlike anything the Empire had ever experienced. The humans did not fight like other conquered species, who relied on superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they fought with a creativity born of desperation and 3 centuries of careful planning. When Imperial fighters swarmed toward Reed's ship, he did not try to outrun them. Instead, he flew directly into the nearby asteroid field, using the mining charges his ship legitimately carried to turn space rocks into deadly projectiles. The Imperial pilots, trained for clean fleet engagements, found themselves dodging debris clouds and explosion chains that seemed to follow no tactical pattern. "Sir, they're using mining equipment as weapons," reported the Imperial Admiral's tactical officer, confusion clear in his voice. "Impossible," Vorthak replied. "Those are civilian ships with civilian crews." But as the battle continued, it became clear that nothing about the human defense was civilian. The cargo containers floating throughout the system suddenly revealed themselves as automated weapon platforms. The communication satellites began jamming Imperial sensors. Even the orbital garbage collection system had been turned into a delivery method for surprise attacks. The Empire's ships were larger and more advanced, but the humans fought with a desperate ingenuity that turned every piece of space debris into a potential weapon. When the Iron Wolf finally took too much damage to continue fighting, Reed made a choice that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. "All hands, abandon ship," he ordered. But instead of fleeing, he remained at the controls, setting course directly for the Imperial flagship. "Tell them back home that we made them pay for every inch." The Iron Wolf slammed into Admiral Vorthak's bridge at full speed, taking both ships out of the battle in an explosion that lit up space like a second sun. Similar scenes played out at Fort Independence and Haven's Rest. The Empire won all 3 battles, but the victory reports that reached Zephyr Prime told a story that chilled Imperial commanders to their cores. 40,000 casualties, Fleet Admiral Korvex read from the datapad, his voice barely above a whisper. 40,000 Imperial personnel dead or wounded. 4-3 minor colonies. Emperor Valdris IX studied the tactical reports with growing unease. The humans had fought with a level of coordination and planning that suggested decades of preparation. Their tactics showed knowledge of Imperial ship designs and combat procedures that should have been classified. "How many human worlds are there?" the Emperor asked quietly. Korvex consulted his files. "Approximately 437 colonies, Your Majesty. Plus their homeworld of Earth." The throne room fell silent as the implications sank in. If every human world fought like these 3 had, the Empire would need to sacrifice millions of personnel for a complete conquest. "Perhaps," Korvex suggested carefully, "we should consider diplomatic solutions." The Emperor's eyes blazed with fury. "No. The humans have chosen war. We will give them war until they remember their place." But across the galaxy, other conquered species had been watching the battles. For the first time in centuries, they had seen someone successfully resist the Empire's might. On distant worlds, whispered conversations began about freedom and rebellion, and hope. The war that followed the destruction of New Sydney, Fort Independence, and Haven's Rest consumed the galaxy like wildfire. Emperor Valdris IX, his pride wounded by humanity's unexpected resistance, committed the full might of the Imperial fleet to crush the rebellion once and for all. But what the Empire discovered in the months that followed shattered everything they thought they knew about their human subjects. Lieutenant Colonel Kate Phillips stood in the command center of Fortress Gibraltar, humanity's greatest secret. For 3 centuries, the Empire had believed it was a simple asteroid mining operation in the Outer Rim. Imperial inspectors had visited dozens of times, always finding exactly what they expected: miners extracting valuable metals from floating rocks. They had never suspected that the miners had been hollowing out the largest asteroid in the system, turning it into the most powerful military base in human space. "Enemy fleet approaching," announced Major Robert Clark from his sensor station. 800 Imperial ships, including 12 dreadnoughts. Phillips studied the tactical display showing the massive Imperial formation. Any normal military commander would have evacuated immediately. 800 ships against their small garrison was suicide. But Phillips smiled instead. "They think we're trapped in here with them," she said to her staff. They don't understand that they're trapped out there with us. She opened a communication channel that reached throughout the asteroid belt. All ships, this is Gibraltar Control. Execute Protocol Lazarus. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for centuries to come, assuming any Imperial academies survived to tell the tale. The asteroids themselves came alive. What the Empire had catalogued as natural space debris suddenly revealed weapon ports and engine exhausts. Rocks that had drifted peacefully for decades began moving in perfect formation. The asteroid belt transformed into the largest fleet of warships ever assembled, each one carved from stone and metal, invisible to Imperial sensors until they opened fire. Impossible, breathed Imperial Admiral Draxus as his sensors tried to make sense of what they were seeing. There are thousands of them. The battle that followed lasted 16 hours and changed the course of the war. The Empire had brought their largest fleet to crush a single human outpost, but found themselves fighting an entire hidden civilization that had been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. But the real shock came when other species joined the fight. Commander Jack Turner led a mixed squadron of human ships and alien vessels toward the Imperial supply depot at Kepler Station. His second-in-command was a tall, bird-like creature named Sky Whisper, one of the Altarian people who had been enslaved by the Empire for 2 centuries. Human Commander Turner, Sky Whisper said in his musical voice, "My people are honored to fight beside yours. For too long we have watched others suffer as we have suffered." Turner looked around his bridge at the mixed crew working the stations. Humans, Altarians, even some of the crystal beings from Vector who communicated through light patterns. Former enemies and strangers, all united by one simple idea: freedom. Admiral Carter was right, Turner said as they approached their target. Freedom really is contagious. The Empire found itself fighting not just humanity, but dozens of species they had conquered over the centuries. The whale-like cetaceans of Aquatica used their massive colony ships to ram Imperial vessels. The insect hive minds of the outer colonies swarmed Imperial bases with millions of small fighters. Even the peaceful plant people of the Garden Worlds began poisoning Imperial food supplies. On Zephyr Prime, Emperor Valdris IX stared at casualty reports that grew longer every day. In 6 months of fighting, the Empire had lost more ships and personnel than in the previous century of conquest combined. "Your Majesty," Fleet Admiral Korvax said during their morning briefing, "perhaps it's time to consider a negotiated settlement. The humans have proven more resourceful than we anticipated." The Emperor slammed his fist on the war table, scattering tactical displays. "No. We will not negotiate with rebels and slaves. Gather every reserve fleet, call back every ship from patrol duty. If these creatures want total war, we will give them total war." But across the Empire, the rebellion continued to spread. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, human slave workers sabotaged the weapons factories. On the agricultural world of Green Fields, the food shipments to Imperial worlds began arriving spoiled or poisoned. Even on the Empire's core worlds, the servants and laborers who had been invisible for centuries suddenly became dangerous. Captain Lisa Morgan commanded one of humanity's most daring operations during this time. Leading a team of volunteers, she infiltrated the Imperial prison world of Dark Rock, where political prisoners from across the galaxy had been held for generations. "The guard towers are automated," reported her demolitions expert, Sergeant Paul Wright. "But the main prison complex is still staffed by Imperial troops." Morgan studied the fortress through her binoculars. Inside those walls were thousands of beings who had been imprisoned simply for speaking about freedom. Leaders, teachers, artists, and thinkers from dozens of species, all locked away because the Empire feared ideas more than weapons. "We're not just rescuing prisoners," she told her team. "We're rescuing the future." The assault on Dark Rock succeeded, but at a terrible cost. Half of Morgan's team died getting the prisoners out, but what they accomplished changed everything. Among the rescued prisoners were former government leaders, military commanders, and scientists from across the galaxy. People who had been thought dead for decades suddenly returned to lead their own species' rebellions against Imperial rule. The Empire's response was swift and brutal. Entire worlds that showed signs of rebellion were subjected to orbital bombardment. Imperial forces began executing civilians suspected of supporting the resistance. The Emperor's new orders were simple: complete submission or total destruction. But for every world the Empire destroyed, 10 more joined the rebellion. The galaxy had finally learned what humanity had discovered 3 centuries earlier: that some things were worth dying for. And in the hidden shipyards and secret bases scattered across human space, Admiral Carter prepared for the final battle that would determine the fate of every free being in the galaxy. The final battle began at dawn on Zephyr Prime, though in space there was no true dawn, only the artificial light of 1,000 burning ships. Admiral William Carter stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiant Dawn, watching as the largest fleet in human history took position around the Empire's capital world. Behind him stretched a formation of ships that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year earlier. Human vessels flew alongside Altarian bird ships, cetacean whale cruisers, and the crystal formations that served as vector battleships. Former enemies had become brothers in arms, united by their shared dream of freedom. "All fleets report ready, Admiral," announced Captain Sarah Blake, his communications officer. 3,000 ships from 47 different species. Carter nodded, but his attention was focused on the Imperial fleet facing them. Emperor Valdris IX had gathered everything the Empire had left, 5,000 ships representing the accumulated military might of centuries of conquest. It was the largest force ever assembled in galactic history. "Open a channel to the Imperial flagship," Carter ordered. The view screen shimmered and revealed the throne room of the Emperor's personal dreadnought. Valdris IX sat on his golden chair, surrounded by the surviving members of his war council. His yellow eyes burned with hatred as he looked at the human who had brought his empire to the brink of collapse. "So," the Emperor said, his voice cold as the void between stars, "the little human thinks he can threaten the heart of our civilization. You have cost us much, Admiral Carter, but this ends today. We will burn every world you have ever touched." Carter studied the alien ruler who had held the galaxy in chains for so long. Up close, Valdris looked smaller than his reputation, more frightened than furious. The mighty Emperor was just another being clinging to power he had never deserved. "No, Your Majesty," Carter replied calmly. "You won't. Because you've finally learned what we tried to teach you 3 centuries ago. Some things are worth fighting for. Some prices are too high to pay. Some spirits cannot be broken, no matter how long you try." The Emperor's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Pretty words, human. But words will not save you from the reality of Imperial firepower. All ships, attack Pattern Omega. Destroy them all." The battle that followed shook the very foundations of space itself. Ships the size of cities exchanged fire that lit up the darkness like newborn stars. The Empire's vessels were individually more powerful, their weapons more advanced, their armor thicker. But the rebel fleet fought with something the Empire had never understood, the knowledge that they were fighting for something greater than themselves. Captain James Foster commanded a wing of converted mining ships as they dove through the Imperial formation. His vessels were outgunned and outnumbered, but they moved with perfect coordination, each ship covering the others as they struck at the massive Imperial dreadnoughts. "Remember," he told his pilots over the communication channel, "we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to end a war." The mining ships used their industrial equipment in ways the Empire had never imagined. Plasma cutters designed for asteroid processing sliced through Imperial armor. Gravitational manipulators meant for moving cargo through enemy fighters into each other. Even the simple tractor beams became weapons when used to drag Imperial ships into crossfires. But the real turning point came when Captain Lisa Morgan led a desperate boarding action against the Emperor's flagship itself. Her small assault ship, the Freedom's Edge, slipped through the chaos of the main battle and latched onto the Imperial vessel's docking bay. 20 Marines against a crew of 5,000, muttered Sergeant Michael Wright as they prepared to board. "I've had better odds." Morgan checked her weapon one final time. "We're not here to fight 5,000 people, Sergeant. We're here to reach one." The fight through the Imperial flagship was brutal. The Emperor's guards were well trained and well equipped, but Morgan's team moved with the desperate energy of people who knew this was their last chance. Step by step, corridor by corridor, they fought their way toward the throne room. When Morgan finally reached the Emperor's chamber, she found Valdris IX cowering behind his golden chair, his war council dead or fled. The mighty ruler of the galaxy looked exactly like what he had always been, a bully who had never faced real opposition. "Surrender," Morgan said, her weapon trained on the trembling Emperor. "Call off your fleets. Help us build something better than this empire of chains and fear." "Never," Valdris snarled, reaching for a hidden weapon. "I will die before I submit to inferior creatures like you." Morgan's shot was quick and clean. The Emperor who had ruled the galaxy through fear and oppression died as he had lived, trying to hurt someone weaker than himself. But the war did not end with Valdris's death. It ended when Morgan activated the flagship's communication system and broadcast a simple message to every Imperial ship in the battle: "The Emperor is dead. The war is over. Any ship that wants to surrender will be treated with honor and respect." One by one, Imperial vessels began powering down their weapons. Some continued fighting to the bitter end, but most chose surrender over destruction. The galaxy's longest nightmare was finally ending. 5 years later, Admiral Carter stood in the observation lounge of New Geneva Station, humanity's newest diplomatic center. Through the vast windows, he could see ships from dozens of species docking peacefully together. The Galactic Federation was still young and fragile, but it was built on something the Empire had never understood: the idea that cooperation was stronger than domination. "The rehabilitation programs are going well," reported Commander Sarah Blake, now his aide and friend. "Former Imperial officers are adapting to democratic principles faster than anyone expected. Even the Zephyrian people seem relieved to be free of their Emperor's tyranny." Carter nodded as he watched a group of mixed-species children playing in the station's central plaza. Human and Altarian children chased each other through the corridors while Vectar younglings flashed happy light patterns. Even some young Zephyrians had joined the games, their yellow scales bright with joy. "Funny thing about freedom," Carter said quietly. "Once you taste it, you can never go back to chains." The galaxy had learned humanity's greatest lesson. Sometimes the best victory is giving your enemy the chance to become something better.